What is art? That, my friend, is a loaded question. Take a look around. Stop and think about it. Can you feel it? ArtPrize has taken over again. And tonight, the conversation behind the pieces takes center stage. The critics are ready to unveil what they think should take home the money. From 24-Hour News 8, this is the ArtPrize Jurors Award Shortlist. Live from the ArtPrize Hub in downtown Grand Rapids.
Tonight, we're helping you see the best art and unveiling the artists who have a chance of winning the big $200,000 Grand Jury Award. Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Leonard.
And I'm Brett Thomas. This is the first step towards narrowing down who's going to be the big winner at ArtPrize this year. You'll see all the milestone moments right here on Wood TV 8.
Tonight, we'll unveil the jurors' favorites during the shortlist. On Sunday, it's your turn. We'll find out the public's favorites during the final 20. Next week, we'll have live shows each weeknight discussing the finalists and bringing you live concerts, ending with the main event, the ArtPrize Awards.
Well, tonight, ArtPrize has assembled an all-star panel of jurors from around the entire nation. Here's how this is going to work. Each juror is going to be responsible for one category tonight. They'll announce their top 5 list for their award. Here's a look at the categories. The winner of each award will win $20,000. Also new this year, one of these pieces, one of them that's announced tonight, will win the $200,000 Grand Jury Award. So pay attention, because it's going to be chosen out of these 25. All the winners will be announced live right here on Wood TV on October 10th. During the ArtPrize Awards.
So let's get straight to those shortlists. We'll begin with the two-dimensional category. We're talking about things like drawings, photographs, paintings. Last year, the painting Europa and the Flying Fish won this category. The jury picking the two-dimensional winner is Andrew Russeth, senior editor of the New York Observer's Gallerist. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So what exactly were you looking at when you were talking about looking at 2D?
We were looking at, basically anything that's flat, as you said, paintings, drawings, photographs, just an incredible variety of things. I think there were about 980 entries, and so we just ran around the city, tried to see absolutely everything.
How do you do that? You don't have that much time.
Well, what's great is that ArtPrize sets us up with local jurors. Okay. So I worked with Tamara Fox, who's an artist and art professor, and she took us around, had it all mapped out, and so we had a good amount of time everywhere and could really see everything.
Let's get to your short list right now. The first one, The Hair Craft Project by Sonia Clark of Kendall College.
Absolutely, just love this piece. So it's right in the entryway when you walk in, and on the right side she has photographs, and she's worked with different hair artists, West African hair artists, to do just elaborate, beautiful weaving. And each photograph, it's her hair that's been done by a different artist, and so as you walk along you can kind of examine the intricacies of that. Then on the left, those hair artists have used silk and replicated those various hairstyles on the canvases. And so it's this fascinating thing where they almost look like abstract paintings or Rorschach blots, and at the same time they look like buildings or architecture. Just totally fascinating. It's something that we don't normally get to take a look at really closely.
Awesome. Number 2, Soldier by Suzanne Opton at the Graham. We heard about this morning on Daybreak when we were speaking to one of the local artists. This really caught her eye as well.
Yeah, it's just a wonderful piece, and it's an example of you doing something very simple. Just asking a soldier to lay down, move their head on the floor, enlarge it to a gigantic scale, and just create these images that are frightening and sad and kind of filled with all of this emotion. And looking at them, you can see kind of they're looking off into the distance. They've seen things that we haven't. They almost take on the look of a statue of some sort. And it's just such a simple, elegant idea. And there's so much great work involving the military and soldiers throughout ArtPrize. And I thought that was a really strong entry.
You can think of just a million different things that person may be thinking of.
Oh, exactly, yeah.
So many things they've seen during that time.
Very ambiguous.
The next one, Artistic Witness of Chelsea Manning's Court Martial by Deborah Van Poolen at the Fountain Street Church. And Deborah is from Wayland, here locally in West Michigan.
Wonderful. And so this is, I think, just a great example of kind of a very old school idea of an artist. So often we think about an artist having to make an abstract painting or express something new. And here, Deborah went to the Chelsea Manning trial, who was on trial for releasing WikiLeaks cables. Photographers were not allowed, so she lived in Maryland for 100 days, attended the very high security trial, brought these images out that otherwise we as the public wouldn't be able to see. And they're very, so she's doing an investigative kind of journalistic project, but at the same time they're very mysterious, strange images, I think. All sorts of the colors are very interesting, all sorts of pinks, and it kind of, you get a sense of just how bizarre that event was.
Well, it's really appreciating court sketch artists who really go unappreciated, because when we can't bring our cameras into a courtroom, that's who we rely on.
Absolutely.
But it is an art.
It's a record of history. When we go back and read about the Manning trial, we're going to be looking at her work.
Amazing. 24 Circles and Diamonds by Zach Morey at Cathedral Square. Also entered in 2012 and 2011. This is the first time on the shortlist, though.
I just thought this was another example of something very basic and simple that is just really incredibly well executed. And this work I had seen as a JPEG, it's an online photo, and I couldn't really make anything of it, but you see them in person, and he's doing these very tiny graphite units, little sketches of squares, and building them out. Kind of like artists were doing in the 60s and 70s with minimalism, and you can tell they're so labor intensive, and just the amount of emotion and visual effect that he gets, they're really fun to spend time with and really look closely at.
That's pretty cool. Another one, Unchain the Neighborhood by Heartside Arts Collective, the Heartside Gallery and Studio on Division Avenue.
Yeah, just
fell
in love with this. I mean, this was 15 artists that came together and just did, a lot of some self-portraits, some views of the neighborhood, and it's great. Throughout ArtPrize, you see beautiful rivers and all sorts of beautiful landscape work. And here they kind of looked at the parts of the city that are maybe not so conventionally beautiful. There are highway underpasses and streets that are maybe a little bit dilapidated. And it's incredibly emotional work in the self-portraits. They're really kind of putting themselves out there. And I thought really inventive painting, just fun to see.
Really was amazing to see all these different pieces that are now in the top 5 that you've presented here. When you're looking at all these pieces, what do you go with, your heart or your head?
That's a great question. I think it's a little bit of both. I'm looking for something that kind of no one else in the world, you get the sense, could make. Something that's so unique and something that I just haven't seen before. And so with all of these things, it was kind of, we're trying to give a careful look to everything. But, these were all ones that stopped me dead in my tracks and just, whoa, I want to know more.
Well, you can't tell people how to feel. Well, what is your advice to people as they're out looking at art? Do you open your heart, open your eyes, a little bit of both?
I think a little bit of it, and trust your gut. I think, try to put yourself in the artist's shoes. I always like to think about how an artist started making something. What was the first thought they had? But then, trust your gut and just go with it. Talk with people.
Hearts, brains, and guts.
Exactly.
Not a bad combination. Kind of need all of them. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Andrew, thank you.
All right, now to 3D. Things like sculptures and installations. Last year, Through the Skies for You won. You might remember seeing it all at Kendall College. The juror for the category this year is Shamim Momin. She is the head at the Los Angeles Nomadic Division and an adjunct curator at the Whitney Museum of American Art. So thank you so much for coming in to chat with us today, all the way in from LA.
Yes, indeed.
How was the trip over here? Did you have any trouble coming in because of all the troubles at O'Hare?
It wasn't too bad, actually, because I came via San Antonio, where we also just opened an exhibition. So I had a little bit of a jaunt on the way.
Not bad. All right. Thank you so much for coming in here. Let's get to your artwork here, because you certainly have 5 we want to talk about here. Let's start with House by Osman Khan. It's at Frederick Meyer Gardens and Sculpture Park. The person who is responsible for this, Osman Khan, is from Ann Arbor, a relatively local artist. Tell us about it.
Well, one of the things that I loved about this piece, it does reference some earlier kinds of sculpture from the 70s that were using industrial materials, things like fluorescent lighting and so on, but for a very different reason. And here you have him using the fluorescent lighting tubes to create a kind of schematic house, the same way you would draw one as a child almost. So really like your most personal reference, the place that you come from, the place where you live, the site in which you live. It's done as a 3D construction, of course, given that that's the sculptural capacity, and one that you can't enter into it, but you can look into it and think about what's in the heart of that sculpture and the schematic idea of your home, of your house.
Just the essence of what a home is here. It's very philosophical. I think I took a course on that in college at one point. Let's talk about Tango Hombre by Maximo Gonzalez from Kendall College.
Now this, I'm glad that there's a close-up of it, because it's one of those pieces that's, one of the things I loved about it is how subtle it is. There's a series of these very small capsules that you can see in the close-up that each contain a grain of rice, on which is written the title, which translates to those of you who don't speak Spanish to "I'm hungry." So it becomes a sort of plaintive voice, this very small individual voice encapsulated within that little glass piece that assembles into a community of voices. So of course referencing that social concern as well, but in a very subtle, modest, elegant, evocative way. I really like that you had to get up very close to it and interact with it very personally.
Very personal piece of artwork, isn't it? And also one that you can relate to, because everybody has felt hunger at some point in their lives. Okay, From a Farm, It is an Island by Alicia Wessler. This is at Frederick Meyer Gardens and Sculpture Park as well.
This is another piece where it was so important that the individual objects were something that you encounter very closely. The setup of it in the multiple vitrines of all of these very small, handmade or intricately made objects recalls a kind of archaeological museum, the way that you would go, again, when you're young, go to a natural history museum, try to learn about other cultures, other ways of being, tools, things like that. It invites that same kind of introspection and close looking and intimate engagement with it. It doesn't give as much of a read. It's not as literal as that, certainly, so it becomes a kind of imaginative journey of your own as well to try to figure that out and what it might be.
Is that something that you had to do on your own as you went in there? Did you kind of have to have your own little exploration, your own little learning environment as you walked around and looked at this piece here, rather than reading the explanation from the artist and needing that in order to be able to get the purpose? I always
start with looking at things first. I mean, certainly the information behind and especially talking to the artists and, as was mentioned before, kind of thinking about how they might have come up with the idea is critical to a deeper understanding. But it's really important to me as a curator and thinking about artwork to start to engage it in a very direct, personal, physical way.
All right, Wall Wave Vibration by Loris Cecchini. This is at Frederick Meyer Gardens and Sculpture Park.
You know, again, another that looks like one thing and then you get closer and you kind of get a sense of what it actually is. Now, it does look like a painting or a wall work that would be in the 2D category, but in this case, it's actually as if something's sort of growing from the wall out, like as if the wall becomes a skin or a kind of organic material and pushes out into a sculptural pattern. And it's based on a kind of ripple pattern, like if you think about throwing a stone into the water or something like that, a natural organic movement and motion. So it evokes also the idea of sound or again, movement and so on, as well as a static object.
Great Wall of Bees, Intelligence of the Beehive by Ladislav Hanka. That's at the UICA.
And to speak about living things, or the suggestion of living things, this is an actual group. It's actually a beehive that's created in this vitrine, whereby the bee colony is building their honeycombs, they're having their children, they're living their lives on the artist's work, which are a series of etchings done in also a very a specific, laborious, hand-done way based on sort of ancient traditional method. And then the bees doing their own ancient traditional method, as it were, and building their houses, making their patterns, making their art as onto the pieces themselves.
This is also a commentary on the situation the bees are in right now. We've had all these hives that have been dying off due to various reasons in the environment.
And that sort of cumulative notion of what impacts, what creates these sort of these trajectories in our environment is done in a more subtle way. I think it's creating a beautiful thing, but calling attention to a very serious problem.
This looks like something you could look at for hours.
Completely. There's
and
a lot.
I'm sure the kids love it too.
I want to mention that Ladislav is from Kalamazoo as well, and we've done a story on this. Steve Kelson, one of our reporters, did a story on this. You can check that out at woodtv.com.
Shani, I know you're from LA. Is this your first time in Grand Rapids?
It is, actually. Yeah, I've been to Detroit, but this is my first time in Grand Rapids specifically.
What
so
have
beautiful.
you heard? Thank you.
Yeah.
We take that as a compliment, of course. What have you heard about ArtPrize before you arrived?
Well, you know, I had heard a lot about it as I have friends who are from here and nearby, but what I was completely shocked by was the amount of people that were actually just out there and looking at things. I mean, I kind of want to show it to Los Angeles and tell them they have to follow that lead, because it's pretty extraordinary. We could barely get to a lot of the things that I wanted to see as quickly. So that's an extraordinary community gesture towards art and towards creativity in general.
We always love having people in from the coast, essentially getting them to stop in between. This isn't just a flyover area. There actually are people who live here in arts and people who appreciate art. So thank you. Thank you for talking to us about that today.
Thank you very much.
Well, we still have a lot more coming up tonight. Up next, we'll talk with the ArtPrize exhibition director about the big $200,000 Grand Juried Award.
And there's still 3 more top 5s to be unveiled tonight. Time-based performance art, installation, and the most outstanding venue. Those are all still ahead, right here on the shortlist on Wood TVA. Stay with us.
Welcome back. Take a live look around the city. There are crowds of people all over experiencing art.
ArtPrize is special. These scenes happening all across our city are unlike any other competition in the entire world. Well, welcome back into the ArtPrize Hub here as we unveil the ArtPrize Jurors Awards shortlist here. So far, you've seen the top 5s for the 2D and 3D awards. We have 3 more categories to go now.
We do. First, there's a look at the cash breakdown for the Juried Awards. Let's take a look here. $20,000 per award. There's also an overall Grand Juried Award, which this year has doubled to $200,000. The winner of that award will come from one of tonight's shortlists. The Grand Juried Award is picked by 3 jurors who will arrive in Grand Rapids later this week. The jurors are Susan Solins, founder of Art21 in New York City. 2 artists, Leonardo Drew and Katarina Gross, will work alongside Solins.
Well, joining us now live is Kevin Beist, Exhibitions Director for ArtPrize. Thank you for coming in to chat with us here about this.
Glad to be here.
Big task here. You got a lot of work ahead of you.
There's a lot to do.
Yes, sir.
But it sort of goes in stages. So tonight's a big night, and then the grand jurors begin arriving tomorrow.
Yeah, tell us what happens when they do get into town. Walk us through that a bit.
Yeah, so they're going to have a list of 20 finalists that are being revealed by these jurors here tonight. 5 from each of the 4 artist categories. And we're going to go around and take a close look at all of those entries, and then they're going to make a determination of which one is the winner of the juried grand prize.
What do these people think when you call them and say, come to town and really take a look at these pieces that other critics, other jurors have already...
Yeah, when we started the Juried Grand Prize 2 years ago, they thought, like, well, that's weird. I guess I'll try that out. But it's grown, and it's like become more known because I started to talk to Susan about bringing her out, and that conversation grew into a great partnership with Art21, and where it coincides with the premiere of Art21 Season 7, and I worked closely with Susan in getting Leonardo and Katarina, who are featured in Art21 Season 7, to round out that jury. So, so it's become a part of this big partnership, which we're really excited about.
Not as much arm twisting as in years past.
Not as much arm twisting.
Or begging either.
Yeah.
That's good to know. Let's talk about that. One of the reasons why they're probably wanting to get more involved in this is you guys have certainly changed the prize structure here to allow for the first time this year where we're going to see the juried awards come from the shortlist.
Yep.
Let's talk about that. Why?
Yeah, so the structure change to the juried awards is actually kind of slight. So one thing is that the juried grand prize doubled from $100,000 to $200,000, and then in previous years we allowed the grand jurors to have a little bit more leeway, and they would look not only at the shortlisted artists but also at artists that were in the nominated venues. This year we tightened that up and have it just be the 20 nominated artists. And the reason we did that is because we wanted it to mirror what we're doing on the public vote. And so the public vote side is going to work that same way, where next Sunday we'll reveal 20 artists from 4 categories and the public vote finalists, and then the public vote grand prize will also come only from those 20. So it just has a bit more of a parallel logic to it.
So now there's somebody who could, in theory, win $440,000?
They could win $400,000.
Okay.
So if either on the public vote or the juried side, if they win both the grand prize and their category, they get 200, not 220.
Okay.
Okay, very good. Well, like a lot of things here.
because too bad.
Because 200 just isn't quite enough.
Yeah, right.
It's really disappointing.
But things keep changing as we go along here. I know you guys have continued to kind of make changes and trying to increase the the number of artists that come here and some of the higher level artists that come here. Have you been successful that way?
You know, I think that we have, but at the same time, we really cannot claim all the credit for that. The credit really goes to our venues and the curators at those venues and the incredible work that they do. And that's, you know, we have sort of a higher level relationship with artists, but it's really the venues that are working on the ground and like rolling up their sleeves and helping these artists get here and make these incredible projects. So, and that's really a community effort, and all of those venues are local, and they're doing incredible work because we're asking them to, and we're extremely thankful for that.
All right.
Well, the evolution of ArtPrize, and you guys have certainly found a successful mix of public and critic votes and prizes.
Yeah, and certainly
really
captured our attention. This has been so much fun. Thank you for coming in and talking about that. Good luck on the show. You can only watch all the ArtPrize Awards handed out in one single place, right here at Wood TV8. Our live coverage starts Friday, October 10th at 7 p.m.
Now to the next shortlist, the time-based category. These are works like a performance or a film. Last year, an animated video titled The Last Post won. The juror for this category this year is Harag Vartanian, the editor-in-chief and co-founder of Hyperallergenic, a well-respected art blogazine.
That's right.
Blogazine, that's interesting, and I love it.
Let's start with that. What is a blogazine exactly?
Well, we like to call it part blog, part magazine, and we like the fact that, I mean, I guess like time-based art, it makes people think about what does that mean. Okay. So that's why I love time-based art so much.
Time-based art, to me, is one of the most hard to accept, or at least hard to really get a grasp of just from looking at that art. How do you explain it to people? How would you take me into a gallery and say, what would you tell me to look at? I suppose it's different with each piece, but is there any way to start?
Well, I mean, it starts everything from video to performance. So I always say just sort of keep yourself open and just try to look at the world and what's sort of changing your perception of the world. And I think often that's what time-based art does, because it does sort of function in our own sort of time. And it distorts that just enough often so that you start thinking about, okay, how has this shifted my perception?
Okay, let's start off with number one here. Respirator, Breather by Dance in the Annex at Site Lab, Morton House. Dance in the Annex is a Grand Rapids modern dance collective. Dance in the Annex was also on the time-based shortlist last year in 2013.
Well, I thought this was one of the most successful works in terms of taking a site that was probably well known to a lot of people in Grand Rapids and really transforming it, but at the same time it retains the memory of the site. I mean, this place was a hotel, it was Section 8 housing, it was also, there was a kitty cat club in it. I mean, there are all these things, so, you know, there's a bar and all these things, and it takes a lot of those elements and it transformed it into movement. And, you know, at its essence, performance and dance is about moving in space. And they just showed the way the body changes when you move in a small vault-like space and in a big open space with a lot of light. The body changes, and we react to those spaces, and often they're even dancing in like hallways. And if you're lucky enough, you have the opportunity to have them dance around you, because they sort of show up at these moments during the event and dance through crowds. And it's amazing just to watch people sort of scatter. You know, like you sort of drop a pebble in a pond and sort of everything goes to the edges.
Is that what's supposed to happen, though? Or is that just people reacting to it?
I think we sort of have that natural reaction because we're not used to being to being participants in a work. We're always used to being observers. And time-based art sometimes asks you to be part of the work. And
sometimes asks you to be uncomfortable with it too.
Exactly. And that's usually change happens when you're uncomfortable and you're trying to figure out what's going on. And I mean, this piece really did take something that people knew or remembered and made the experience different. And also just honoring the memory of the space, which is, I think, you know, all of us, you know, anywhere we live has anxiety about the city changing so quickly and something happens. And now I think they're selling condos or something in this space.
Yeah.
So, you know, so it's like, why not also remember what it was and honor that?
Capitalism Works for Me by Steve Lambert at Kendall College.
That's right. Well, this piece I love because of the fact that, you know, capitalism is one of those systems that we sort of all just take for granted in terms of, it's like the air we breathe, you know, but why not think about it? Like any system that we don't think about and becomes invisible, it ends up becoming a structure that, you know, sometimes is unfamiliar to us, and we need to like figure it out. This piece asks a lot of questions. One, it asks, does it work for you? Now, some people may go, well, this is a very anti-capitalist piece. Well, in essence, it's also asking, well, maybe, you know, your idea of capitalism is not the idea of capitalism other people have. And it's creating that conversation, and it's important. And
maybe it's not your ideal of capitalism here. It's interesting, too, that they're using democracy in order to determine.
But it is rigged.
Whether it is.
The piece is rigged. I mean, one of the things I asked at the artist, because if you notice, it only goes up to 999. So if you voted one extra, it goes to 0.
Oh.
So you might actually not realize that you end up the most popular thing could end up being number, you know, at a tally of 2.
Sure.
You know, so it asks that question too. Is the system, you know, rigged sometimes? Is the system working for you? And I think that's the question it's trying to ask.
Operation Pay Dirt $100 Bill Project by Mel Chin at Kendall College. Mel Chin was a grand juror in 2013, interestingly enough.
Yeah. I mean, this project is, I think a lot of people may not realize, it's not only in the gallery. And I think that's one of the things that makes it really unusual. It works in the schools. It actually has a mission to remove lead-based paints from the culture. So I mean, the fact that a contemporary artist can take an idea like this and then, you know, say, okay, let's get students involved, let's get people involved in different kinds of ways, I think is really important.
Live copy by Jason File at the Graham.
Yes. Well, this one, the artist is actually also a human rights prosecutor, and it's just amazing that people think of artists as these sort of figures that don't have specializations in things outside of art. But in this case, he is also a prosecutor, and he was actually appeared on CNN as a specialist. And it raises questions about who are authorities in our culture? Who are these people that we look up to for opinions? And in his case, I think he sort of demonstrates that an artist can also be somebody talking about very, very serious issues in a very informational way.
Very interesting.
Yes.
Part of a newscast. ArtPrize the Musical by Corey Ruffin at the Pyramid Scheme.
Yes.
This artist
have you
from
seen
Grand
it?
Rapids.
Can I ask? No, you haven't. I think everyone should see it. I think everyone should see it. I think you know, one of the things about the piece that I love is it adds a whole subversive element. And I wish there were a lot more subversive works in ArtPrize, because I think one of the things about contemporary art, and a lot of artists tell me, it gives you a sense of freedom that in other fields you don't have. And here, artists are able to lampoon ArtPrize and a lot of the things that we see in a city like Grand Rapids. But these are problems that are happening all around the world. I mean, these are happening everywhere. Why not make fun of these things and make people ask questions about, okay, why is ArtPrize designed the way it is? What is going on? Who are these characters? What are people getting out of it? These are all really important things.
I think that's great.
Yeah.
I think you do have to question it every single time. It only makes you better when you do. Thank you so much for coming in here. And there is still more to come here. Up next, the shortlist for a new category this year, the Installation Award, plus the finalists for the Best Venue Award. That's when we come back live to downtown Grand Rapids.
Welcome back to the ArtPrize Shortlist. You're taking a look at a past winner, Elephants by Adana Care. What an incredible piece. Every time I see it, it's just huge, Brett.
It's beautiful, and it's not the only award winner here. We also have Sleeping Bear Dooms right next to it.
That's
They're
right.
both facing each other, basically. So we're kind of in a hall of champions, really, as we're talking about the shortlist and looking at the top 25 that are being revealed right now.
Of course, Ann Lovelace, last year's winner.
Yep. Welcome back to the ArtPrize Hub. Now it's time for our next category here, next juror category for 2014 we're talking about. Installation art. This is a new one here. It replaces the best use of urban space category. Possibly because the judge was so outspoken the last time we talked.
I think that was 2 years ago, wasn't it?
2 years, right, yeah. We're talking about entries that are dependent on the location that they're installed. Installation is different from 3D in that changing the location of the piece would dramatically change the work. I think that's key here. The jury Ariel Saldivar, Associate Director of the Goss Michael Foundation. You're from Dallas, and thank you so much for coming all the way up here to joining us in the North.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Let's start talking about that here, because this is installation work. Can you explain that a little better? Can you kind of give us an idea of what that means and how that is different than, say, 3D art?
Sure. Well, it's definitely dependent upon the space, and then as a viewer going into the space, kind of changing your perception of that. Given the elements that the artists use incorporated in the space, they can use the space, whether it be outdoor in a public arena or whether it be indoors in an institutional context in a museum, or whether it be in a gas station or a pub. Could be anywhere, but it could change, dramatically affect the space and piece itself.
In a situation like ArtPrize, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? The location and then the art, because you have to partner up with a venue.
Exactly, and that's something that I definitely took into consideration with each artist, you know, thinking about them individually and their particular practices, and are they supporting this idea that they incorporate in their work in this space, and how are they using that space to do that? So.
There's a lot that goes into it. You have to put a lot of thought into all this, as you do with any of the artwork here. But let's start with your 5 that you think are exceptional here. Okay. Symptomatic Constant. This is by Julie Schinkelberg.
Yeah.
It's at Site Lab.
Yeah, it is, yeah. Goodness, I mean, when you walk into the space, first of all, the massive scale of this piece in the space itself is just overwhelming. But as you get closer to it, you find all these little surprises, like personal treasure troves of these objects that kind of lapse over a time, a historical time. It's kind of, and the thing I love about it is just how she seems to document different times of her life through these individual spaces within the piece. So it gets you involved as a viewer and looking at the individual pieces, and then also when you step back, like that's what I love about the building Site Lab. You could go to the 2nd and 3rd floor and actually look down upon the piece and see it from a different perspective, which is important, you know, in this category. And I also got to speak with her for a few moments about her piece and about her process and her work and how personal this work is to her, utilizing kind of encapsulating these memories from these found objects. And I don't know if this was her intention initially, but while I was speaking to her, she said this building was under construction. And so while she was constantly working on this piece, she had all kinds of workers and people walking past her, offering to help give and donate pieces to the piece. So I think in a kind of accidental way, the community also had a hand in making this piece, which I thought was incredible.
It's kind of a collective little like stone soup.
Yeah, and it was, you know, it engaged the public and engaged people to come in and look at the piece and celebrate the space in a way. So.
All right, that's really neat. God Bless America by Darryl Loster. It's at Calder Plaza.
Yeah, in Calder Plaza. So initially, when you walk, you descend. When I saw the piece first time, I descended upon a 3-stair staircase, and there isn't a lot of material in this piece. It's just audio, so it gets you in a different sensory sort of way. It's not as visually I shouldn't say stimulating, but it has this mirrored ball, which kind of creates this reflective sort of idea of these. So in the audio recording, there are 37 politicians that have been recorded saying the phrase, God bless America, and the tone and the different cadence of these different politicians saying this while you're in this space kind of causes you to think about, well, where am I right now? What am I doing? And it just so happens he strategically chose a city municipal building where you go to, you know, get your marriage license and get your driver's license renewed and things like that. So I think he questions in his work our relationship as American citizens to government and to this phrase that has kind of been adopted by our country as a slogan. It's on our money, it's on our currency, and it's said repeatedly in several different contexts.
But also fairly controversial.
Yeah, absolutely. It can be seen that way.
Yes.
Sure.
There's something happening here, speaking of controversial, by Henry Bremer. This is at UICA. Henry's from East Lansing. The 4th time in ArtPrize. In 2013, he hung a ladder above Monroe Center. You'll probably know that one. And in 2012, he hung a man above Monroe Center as well. But this time, he's saying something very different.
Yeah.
Very different. I mean, initially these pieces could come off as shocking, and you don't exactly realize that they're there unless you know that they're there. I wish I could have seen them from like a condo on like a 20th floor story condo, where I could open my window and look out and see this thing. It could be alarming and jarring, and that's kind of actually what's funny about ArtPrize in a sense, because you could be a citizen and you could say, oh, that's just an ArtPrize installation, but if it wasn't in this ArtPrize context, I mean, that would scare the crap out of me. Yeah, definitely. So this piece questions that, like, are we comfortable being censored? Are we comfortable in this new age of technology giving away all of this information, and who is controlling that, and are we comfortable with that, and where does this information go, and are we, comfortable being watched and under surveillance, and are we even aware that we're even under surveillance, and this just isn't even a conversation in context to the city, but even an international global thought.
I thought it was really interesting in the piece that Steve Kelso produced for that. He was talking about the fact that at least we're not being watched like that. But then he also pointed out all the cameras that are everywhere.
Right.
So really, in essence, we are being watched.
Yeah.
We may not be being watched by
And he also
actual
referenced
people.
a Buffalo Springfield song from the 60s, which I think is interesting. That wasn't the inspiration for this work, and so he took that inspiration and is reusing it again.
Oh, wow.
And he even said in his statement, this song could be written now, which I thought was really funny, because it could be.
It's really thought-provoking piece. Self-Portrait as Bunnies by Alex Podesta. It's in the Grand River. It's the only entry in the river this year.
Yeah.
We've had, you didn't see in the past, but we've had that river filled up with stuff before, but this time we've got one there.
Yeah.
What do you think of it?
Well, it was surprising, because when I thought, okay, an entrance in the river, I was looking for something big and large scale. I'm like, where is this? And so as we were walking, I thought, what are the two Easter bunnies doing a performance piece in the river? But it ended up being his work. And so he set up this apparatus to where the two pieces are actually connected to each other, and they're reliant upon each other in movement, and it's completely dependent. The thing that's so interesting about this is that this piece kind of takes on a new definition. It redefines itself based within the context of where it is. So the elements of nature, the movement of the water, could rapidly move these pieces, or kind of put them in a calm sort of setting where they're still, if the water's still. And then if it rains, if there's a storm, they'll move even more. And when he first put this piece into the water, they were completely white and sterile. And I like the idea of these pieces kind of aging, getting distressed, and turning like a dingy gray with the elements. And then it's also a self-representational piece that goes with his work and his body of work, and so it's taken on a whole new life and given the name the Bathers. These bunnies are now bathing, in the Grand River.
Intersections by Anila Kayum Agab. Can you tell us a little bit about that one? It's at the Graham.
Yeah, so this piece, it emulates the Alhambra, which was in Western culture. It was a place known as peace, where all people could gather and reflect, and wherever they came from, they could come and lay all their I guess, discriminations aside, and be able to talk and have discourse with each other. And so when you enter this room, it's completely dependent upon the space, in a white cube sterile space, but you become a part of the piece with these shadows reflecting on you, which I thought was just fascinating, because there were so many people in the room when I saw this piece, and the people kind of became a part of the installation in itself, because you could see this pattern over people's faces, over people's clothing, and it was just beautiful. And it was amazing how everybody just stopped and got really engaged by going all around this figure that was suspended in the center of the room. So it's it's arresting, but also very, very calming. There's just such a sense of peace about that work, which I think was lovely. So,
well, thank you so much for coming in and discussing this and being a part of this space that we happen to call ArtPrize.
Thank you.
We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Well, our final award category of the night is the most outstanding venue. Venues around the city have been working for months to be considered for this $20,000 award. Kendall College won it last year. Site Lab won in 2012 and in 2011. The juror for this category is Tumelo Musaka, an independent curator. Welcome.
Thank you.
So let's start with the first one, the Grand Rapids Art Museum.
Well, I think, given that a lot of the venues are not really art venues. This was one of the more major city venue, which I felt that the installations seemed to really stand out. I mean, it was a clear example of what probably curatorial work should look like. But again, it's a museum, you know. So I think it was nice to see work that was both very participatory, work that was also very accessible in terms of the figuration, and some of the work was also installed within the collection. So I think it was really a nice way to introduce new artists as well as have the works in conversation with the collection, bringing the past and the present together.
Well, there's always a line outside, I can tell you that. I think that's one place when people come to town, when they come to do ArtPrize, they want to get inside the Gram.
Right.
The next one, Kendall College of Art and Design, 2013 venue winner, hosts 4 entries on the shortlist this year.
Right. I mean, I think, you know, this venue was really very provocative. I think their selection was very specific in terms of what they were trying to at least evoke. That, you know, contemporary art is something that is very contentious in terms of the issues that it raises, and it's not something that always sits comfortably with us. And so I felt that the Kendall space really did a great job in terms of the specific works that they selected and how the space they provided for each work. Because again, you know, there's so much artwork out there that it's important to understand that sometimes little does really matter in terms of how you can enter the work and actually engage with the work without feeling that you're being, you know, overpowered by the various other sights and sounds that come from different places. So I thought it was a real careful selection that was very particular.
Well, Kendall is a home to artists too, so it makes sense. Site Lab, the Morton House, 2012 and 2011 venue winner, hosts 2 entries on the short list.
Right. Site Lab was very different in the sense that it was inhabiting a building that was partially in decay but also in reconstruction. And I thought that the selection of the work really resonated well with the history of the place. Several works seem to have been really engaged with the building itself, because I think it's important to think about where the work is placed, the location, the venue. And I think that the curators who worked on this project were very, very in tune with how the works were engaging with the physical structure of the building and how, as an audience, you actually move through the space. Because I think when you curate, you're not only thinking about placing the work on the wall or on the floor, but it's also thinking about how the audience is going to navigate the space. And I think they really did a great job to try to balance all those various elements, because it was a huge building too.
Site Lab does move from place to place too, and so these artworks come in and they kind of inhabit these places, almost like little organisms.
Right.
I think that's something I certainly take for granted is I can't even imagine what goes into the partnership between the venues and the artists when they come together. It's just like, hey, can you do my art? Yeah, it's more than that. It's a lot more than that.
It's very complicated.
Absolutely.
And you know, it's a very ambitious project, and I think they really did an amazing job in terms of really having the right amount of work and also the various types of work. You know, you have installation, as some of my jury colleagues have mentioned, you have video, you have sculpture, and you have performance. You know, I think it's a really dynamic space in terms of trying to bring those various different mediums together in one place.
UICA hosts 2 entries on the short list.
Yes, UICA was also a very interesting site because there was a lot of work that seemed to invite the audience to participate, as well as there was a lot of work that I guess would be more like creating an environment. And so I felt that having seen many of the other spaces and thinking about how each venue was trying to have some level of engagement from the public, I thought that the UICA did a great job in terms of providing that sense as you walk through the many different levels. And again, you know, what's so fascinating about a lot of the art that I was seeing was that there was a real sensitivity given to, that the visual experience doesn't only end at looking, but there's also the sensory experience. And so when you walked through the building, yes, there was a sound piece, yes, there was places where you could interact with objects, places where you could sit and enjoy the sound, and places where you could just see all the light effects that were sort of both affecting the visual and the hearing sensory effect. And so I thought that it was really a nice balance. And then they also had the outdoor space, which was really fantastic to then see some sculptures that were action sculptures that were.
Nice. And Fountain Street Church, they have one entry on the shortlist as well.
Right. I was really impressed with how they, had both, an approach which seemed to reflect a lot of what was being presented around the smaller venues in terms of having one part of their gallery being more like salon-style hanging of different artists' work, and then another area where they actually invited an artist to create an installation, which was a really difficult installation to have, and I thought it was successful in that it really broke away from anything that was familiar with the space and really gave you a different feeling of being transported elsewhere. Mm-hmm. And then there was another space which was more sort of like an installation-based, and I thought it was really ambitious for them to take on these various different approaches in a very small venue.
Yeah, nobody would ever accuse them of not being ambitious, that's for sure, when you're talking about Fountain Street. All right, thank you so much for your time here.
Sure, thank you.
And there you have it. What do you guys think? The shortlist is out now. We know the finalists for the 5 $20,000 Juryd Awards, so stay with us. Right after this break, we're going to talk to the jurors about what they think of Grand Rapids, because they're not from around here, ain't from these parts. What do you guys think of Grand Rapids and of ArtPrize? We're going to get some real answers. Stay with us.